I can't do this with everybody. I can do this with him. And we have, sort of our skill sets are different enough that we don't overlap a lot. And our ideas are different enough that we can kind of bounce off of each other and not just agree on everything all the time. So I think that neither of us takes for granted that the way that we do this is anything but kind of special to the relationship that we formed working together over the years. So that said, I think that, working collaboratively with a group like students has always been rewarding, and, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, when you're in a studio art class at least, it's a very collaborative environment. I mean, there's one big press and everybody's got to share it, and there's, only one piece of equipment that everybody has to work with. So just the facility sort of encourages collaboration and encourages, this sort of community of artists rather than being in your studio alone.
I think it's a natural state of art making. I think anybody that thinks they're the lone genius is totally full of crap. That it just doesn't really happen that way. I was talking with my students the other day that, Picasso was hanging out in the cafes with, it was all the same humans, because where else were they going to go? They weren't going to the movies, they weren't staying home to check their Facebook page. They were down drinking absinthe and talking trash about what kind of artwork they were going to make. And that collective experience is what drove, that kind of art making. And the New York school and Max's Kansas City and, more contemporary, like the Beautiful Loser folks, that's all around that, Aaron Rose dude, and just, a little hive of people, supporting one another, And then on the stupider end, I came up in sort of acid house rave culture where, the Designers Republic were, to me, the hottest printmakers out, so this graphic design group that wasn't about personal identity. It was about cloaking that identity and the mystique behind that being interesting, or turning yourself into some mini ridiculous corporation. So some of that is in Midwest Press that's kind of funny. It's me and him and this is what we do this under, and that there would be room if there were other humans that could be or would be involved. So I think that's where, mostly it came from. Mm-hmm. It's not a direct mark. I'm not taking my hand and then moving the ink or the whatever. I have to have this intercessor. The block is in between my idea, my expression, and then literally an impression, So, but because there's that middle step, I think that's why there's this rich sort of, playground,
Yeah, I think there's always something about that mediated mark where you feel like, to some degree, you didn't make it, or you didn't have everything to do with making it. Mm-hmm. And so it is a little bit, not just a surprise, but, it's a little you learn something each time because it has a certain voice of its own that, it's contributing to the process.
We've seen things like that happen. We know that if this smashes with that, and we, how to push or pull this pink off of that green. But, the math gets so complex with these, and that's part of why these are so ridiculous in terms of how many colors and the stripes and whatnot, is that we don't want it too predetermined. Every time that print comes up, if we're not also surprised, we've screwed up, if it's not, Christmas time, each time the print comes up, we didn't quite get it right. So yeah, that little, like I said, that kerf, that misfire of the laser being too high and then cutting it too wide, we're definitely going to exploit that. We don't want it to work right. We like the way it works wrong, because we get those beautiful little, halos popping through from these. And that's really only possible with one being smashed over another. We wouldn't get it if it was just one run. Then it'd just be the white of the paper that would run through that spot. Whereas this way, that white of the paper from the last run gets straight, sort of brown or blue or pink to really shine.
a lot of times it is kind of deciding, not just what color and where and all that stuff. It's also deciding what needs to come out, which way the blocks turn. So, and we do frequently just carry over, the next print and just hold it next to the block so we can more easily visualize like what's going to land where and how that may affect what's there. So there's a lot of the voice of the medium and a lot of surprise, but there's also a lot of us actively trying to control what's ultimately not that controllable. And I think that's a good mix of things. I don't think that's a frustrating mix of things. I think that's the way we would ultimately want it to be.
Yeah. I mean, today it's snowing. I tell my students, like, making art should be like driving on snow. Like, you can't oversteer, you can't understeer, you can't hit the brakes too hard, you can't be too soft. Like, you have to be incredibly responsive when you drive in the snow, And if your artwork is ever too push button, too automatic, too oversteer, too understeer, then, you're screwing up, And so they actually have, I think, a body haptic sort of like experience to help them understand, like, your art should kind of feel this way too. Like, you're a little freaked out, but you can do it, So we're always, and just to be sensitive, like that 32nd of an inch of light is incredibly important, and that to lose it would be to lose like something really important. So
I think too, like maybe something that people don't understand is that the work is an evolution of ideas and concepts that we not only take seriously and invest in, but when we're having lunch and we're having pizza and we're sitting there thinking about what we're going to do next, we get a crazy idea like, let's make a print that's all art marks because that seems ridiculous, and then that sort of evolves over time to become something that we take very seriously. So it starts off as this like, I bet we can't do that sort of mentality, and it ends up being something that we're like freaking out when it's not going the way we want it to go. So I think when people come in and they see it and they think, oh, it's a woodcut and it's abstract and whatnot, I think when you spend time with them, you start to understand that like there's a lot of not only patience in them and discipline in them, but there's also criticism in them, and there's also content in them that maybe a casual viewer is not gonna pick up on.